Hello, 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 and welcome to our panel discussion on what's next in content delivery, hosted by Digital TV Europe and sponsored by Velocix. What are we going to talk about today? We'll be looking at the key innovations in content delivery that you should have on your radar for the coming years. We'll consider what's new, what's important, and what will drive the greatest transformations. My name is Andy Waldenspiel, and I'm excited to be your host and moderator of this panel today. In my day job, I'm advising and challenging thought leaders and innovators of the telco and media industry to connect the dots. Now, let me introduce you to our guests today. We'll have Pedro Bandera of Deutsche Telekom and Jim Brickmeyer of Velocix. So Jim and Pedro, please unmute yourself and join me here on stage. Hello.
Hello. How are you?
Andy. Happy to be here.
Hi.
Hello, Jim.
Hola, Pedro. Hello, Jim. Great to see you. Fantastic. So instead of me doing the work and introduce you, I'll let you do that yourself. And maybe, Pedro, do you want to start first? Tell us a bit about yourself, Deutsche Telekom, and then we take it from there.
Sure. So, as you said, I'm in Deutsche Telekom. I'm Pedro Bandera. So I'm VP of product in Deutsche Telekom Europe, so responsible for broadband, TV, smart home, and IoT. Here specifically, we are going to talk a little bit about TV. So as you can see in this market, we have, in this slide, we actually have a very complex landscape in Europe, so multiple countries, multiple languages, multiple brands. But at the same time, we are also achieving what's most important to customers, a great and single product approach for all markets. And our vision is just that. The consumer needs across the different markets, they are not different, they are the same. So let's leverage the scale and our ability to do it once and reuse multiple times and achieve greatness across all of our footprint in Europe.
And I think you have another slide. You have another slide, yeah, exactly.
I was going to just say that specifically in Austria as an example, and just to do here the connection to Jim and his own introduction, just to use it as an example. So yes, in Austria, we are using the Velocix CDN rather successfully. So we actually have a very healthy TV operation, over 400,000 customers with a market share also above 50%, and we are the leaders in the market. So it's also a product for a market that, although we are the leaders, we are looking at transformation. So we will also be launching a lot of new things in the near future. It's not because we are leading the way that we are just sitting by. It's actually the other way around. A lot of hard work will see the light of day in the coming months, and we're very happy to be partnering with Velocix.
Thank you, Pedro. Great segue to you, Jim. Tell us about your role and about Velocix, and how are you involved and in shaping the content delivery in the industry?
Sure. So thanks everybody for joining. My name is Jim Brickmeyer. I head up the product organization and the marketing organization at Velocix. I've been in the video streaming space for 20 years, if you'd believe that. It's been a long time, since the early days. So in case anybody's not familiar with Velocix, we're a provider of carrier-grade content delivery solutions, primarily to telco and cable operators, as well as broadcasters around the globe. And we sell a variety of solutions, typically software solutions such as CDN technologies, origin servers, server-side ad insertion, cloud DVR platforms, stuff like that. And we primarily focus on really the largest and most challenging types of deployments that are out there, which is why you can see that a lot of the industry-leading network service providers use our platforms. And we also have fully managed services, and they use us to underpin some of their premium tier service offerings.
Great. Thank you, Jim. And by the way, you have a bit more the darker purple. Deutsche Telekom was making it. I tried to have my colors adjust somewhere in the middle today.
Right in the middle.
Perfect. So let's jump in. Content delivery and the future of content delivery. Of course, one of the first things that comes to mind is cloud. Everyone talks about cloud. Not everyone has yet implemented it everywhere. So Pedro, maybe let's go with you first. How do you see the role of the cloud for content delivery at Deutsche Telekom now, and how will it evolve?
If you look at the first slide that I shared, we are an operation that we are doing business across multiple countries. An operation like that, the usage of cloud even becomes more important, right? So how do you leverage an infrastructure that is not local, that could carry scale across multiple countries? That benefit is the benefit of cloud, and it's there not only for transactional applications, but of course also for streaming. It will for sure have several benefits around synergies. So why should you actually be using different infrastructure to stream the same channels across multiple countries, for instance? How do you actually interconnect in a healthy way with other streaming environments / solutions and actually support across CDN service? How do you also take advantage of your scalable cloud infrastructure to deliver innovative services to customers? All of that comes with speed, and speed is something that you get out of the cloud. The second one is scale. So your ability also, you don't know what will be the demand of tomorrow, and the cloud gives you this ability to scale in an almost endless way to actually meet the demand that is coming from your customers. So the two great benefits are speed and scale, and we want and we are capitalizing on both across our footprint.
Okay. Some people think that moving to the cloud will make things cheaper. What about the cost side? Well, let's not deep dive there, but just, will it be like for like, more expensive, cheaper? I mean, is there a trade-off between these benefits and cost?
I think at the end of the day, depending on how you plan it, it can be both. So it can be actually more expensive or cheaper. It's all about how you do your work. I think, go back to the previous point. More and more you need speed in the things that you are doing. You cannot live with local hosted environments that take forever to actually deliver something, get it done. The most important thing is to get it done. And I think with the cloud, we can get it done at a much faster speed and at a different scale. That's the other point. At times that will come with a cost, but imagine the cost of not serving customers. That's a much higher cost. The cost that you have a Euro Cup football game and the demand is much higher than what you have today in terms of your installed base. How do you quantify that cost? You cannot.
Yeah. I was sitting in the final watching it with a lot of Italians, and it was not Magenta, it was another, and we had stuttering video. It was horrible. So I went home to see us.
I don't understand how you were sitting with friends in Germany and not in front of a Magenta TV solution. We need to have a conversation offline.
Okay, let's do that. But talking about the cloud, there is not one cloud. I think there are multiple. So we talk about hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, or even multi-CDN. What's the right way to go for you, Pedro? And then Jim, I'll let you chime in as well. So is there one solution that can fit everything, or is it a puzzle?
I think if you allow me, Jim, just quickly, and then I'll pass it over to you because you are the expert. But in the operator's perspective, what is important is one word, is to be open so that we can interact and also collect benefits of interconnect with other systems. So more and more you also see other players that are going direct to consumer. Can we interact and interconnect with those solutions? How do I interconnect different CDN solutions across different countries? So that all come with openness, an open environment, and this is what we as operators will require towards the future to companies like Velocix.
Jim, on your side. As we said, CDN is one of the core activities you do. Let's hear from your side. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I agree with Pedro. I mean, I think the message here around openness is that there needs to be flexibility in how content is delivered, and that ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about delivering a service, a high quality service to the end consumer, right? It's you want to make sure that you always have that consistency of that quality of experience, and at times it's going to be best delivered through your own private network. But at other times, you know, if somebody's traveling or if your private network is reaching capacity, you're going to want the flexibility of delivering content through whatever means that you have available to you in order to reach that customer and ensure they get access to the content and that it's a high quality experience. So, you know, since this webinar is focused on the future, what we're really talking about here is a concept called multi-CDN. And what that means is that you leverage the capabilities of private CDNs, of CDNs that are hosted in the public cloud, and also third-party public CDNs as being all of those being available for content delivery to consumers, and then using specialized logic and intelligence within that framework to control exactly how you deliver content at any particular point in time. We definitely see that kind of message that we got here from Pedro around openness as being something that a lot of operators are looking at as they move down the road, is how do I take advantage of all of these new technologies and new assets that are out there, while also leveraging these deep investments that they have in their own networks, and to be able to shift capacity flexibly across those. And at the end of the day, the consumer doesn't need to know exactly how content gets delivered to them. It should be a seamless experience for them, but there's a lot of complexity involved in transitioning traffic across those different environments and measuring it and ensuring you're going to get to the right kind of quality of service.
Okay.
And if you allow me, Jim, just to quickly complement with the question that Andy asked me a few minutes back, this is also the answer to the cost side, like you were mentioning, right? With this approach, we have the ability to better serve the customer locally in a public cloud, in a third-party cloud. We can match the best solution in terms of cost also to the use case that we want to tackle. So I think that's also the beauty of this approach, is that it's giving flexibility to the operator.
So, Jim, you said we're talking about the future. Let's stay for a second. Where are we now? What needs to happen in order to make this multi-CDN a reality? Do we need standards? Is everybody cooking his own little soup, or how will it work? Pedro, what do you think? What needs to happen to make multi-CDN really take off, multi-CDN?
I think there is already a lot of work done. If you look at today, it is possible to have a solution that is a hybrid solution, so a solution that is both local as well as in the cloud, and both working together to address the different use cases. You also get some industry standards regarding interconnection of CDNs that will also be interesting for the future. It seems like Open Cache is also coming into play. I think the pieces are all coming together, so this will be very much a reality. We are here in 2021 talking about the future and innovation, but I think this will be the reality in the 2022 timeline.
Okay. Yeah. Right. You know, expanding on that, I mean, I think really at the heart of all of this is that data drives decisions, right? And that's what we're seeing in these CDN platforms as we move forward, and just generally, how do we improve the customer experience? It has to do with we have all of this data embedded in these networks. We understand what the experience is for customers in many cases. How do we use that information to our advantage to adjust how we deliver content, right? So if we have many different paths to the customer, we can go through private networks, we can go through several kinds of public networks to reach that consumer. If at any point in time the consumer experience is not at a threshold that is defined for what we want the customer experience to be, or maybe there are other sorts of factors involved, like cost factors that we may take into account. The idea is to be able to analyze that data in real time and potentially leveraging some machine learning and artificial intelligence, other sorts of things that you can develop some predictive sense for how things are going to play out as time moves forward, that you can make better decisions that will ultimately result in a better quality of experience for the consumer. And so I think it really is, it's digging even deeper. And we use a lot of data today to route traffic across service provider CDNs to make it highly, highly efficient. But as we start to add all of these other avenues for delivering services, new types of services, it can be very service-specific types of delivery mechanisms. It's more and more important to have that capability to analyze the data properly and to draw those conclusions that then turn into these actions that you can take to extract the most out of the systems that you have available to you.
I'm sure, Pedro, you do some analytics on your side, of course, as well, to orchestrate all those various players that you have in your, let's call it, zoo of 11 countries today.
Of course, we see ourselves, we are not yet there 100%. I think, it's a path, it's a journey, but data is part of our destiny. So we see ourselves as a data-driven organization that we use data to shape our products, but also to shape the quality of the services that we are delivering to end users. So I can 100% see myself in the comments that Jim made. I think the efficiency part is also very, very interesting. I seem to remember many, many years ago, we were talking about CDN efficiency. We were all very worried about how do we maximize CDN efficiency. Now we take exactly the same concept beyond the single CDN into this more complex world of multi-CDN. But the challenge is the same. The only thing that is different is that we have more data, and we also have a better ability to try to predict what's going to happen through that data.
Okay. Great. So we talked about delivery even before we talked about what are we going to deliver. So let's get there and talk about content. And Pedro, you and I just put a little link here for you who haven't seen it. Pedro and I, a few months ago, we had a nice interview connecting the dots about fragmentation of the industry, devices, but also about content. Back then, Pedro, you said content for you is much more than just TV. And I don't know whether your audience heard it this morning. Netflix has just announced that they will move into gaming. So maybe, Pedro, what's the update on your side? What is content for you, and what will be the key contents going forward for Deutsche Telekom?
So as per what we discussed a few months back, so we still have the same definition of content. I think content, it's a much broader definition that usually people think it is. It's not only about the TV shows or the media entertainment. We really need to look at content as anything that can be used by a customer to interact in an, let's call it, entertainment way. So we are talking about the legacy media content, you're talking about gaming, you're talking about audio, podcasts, whatever, you're talking about reading also. You can also do the same through reading. Specifically gaming, I think it's going to become more and more important in the future. It's a different type of entertainment. But if you think about it, it's very much similar to what you have today. The only thing that is different is that you're part of the movie, right? You are part of the movie when you are going through a gaming experience. But the amount of money that we invest nowadays is on par or even above what we invest for for movie production. So it's an area that is very, very interesting, and we as operators need to think about what is our role. And if we think about it, maybe the answer is simple. It should be the same role as we have for the legacy media. What we do, we aggregate content. We are very, very good at aggregating content and delivering great content discovery experiences and aggregation. Most likely that's the answer on how we incorporate also gaming into our offerings and our products in the future.
Okay, thank you, Pedro. Jim, I mean, you talk to Deutsche Telekom, but you have other international telco customers. What's the state of the nation for gaming that you see elsewhere?
Yeah, so I think those conversations are really just starting on some of the gaming. One of the considerations with respect to gaming is that gaming is actually a pretty difficult application to deliver. In fact, if you've watched the gaming streaming market with some of the announcements from Google and Amazon, and you follow any of the blogs on gaming, there have been some some feedback that's been not as flattering as I'm sure they would have liked with some of the initial launches. And one of the rationales for that is not that Google hasn't spent a lot of effort on this. Clearly, they have. It's a really challenging application, right? From a latency perspective, the latency has to be, somewhere on the order of less than 40 milliseconds of latency is what you get from a traditional kind of a gaming console. And for a network to run all of that inside of a network and to reduce the latency that dramatically is a significant challenge. Typically when we think of ultra low latency in a video streaming kind of environment, we're talking about reducing latency so that you're getting video within a few seconds of the live event, right? So when you're talking about milliseconds, your orders of magnitude lower in terms of latency in order to do that. And some of the challenges, I guess when you look forward, I think it's inevitable that the gaming is going to move into the cloud. I think that's why you see these investments from companies like Google and Amazon and Netflix and others. And there will be others. I see telco operators and cable operators and others looking at this kind of thing as potential opportunities as well. But I think what you're going to see is there's a definite march in some of the standards toward reducing that latency and toward introducing some of the capabilities for stuff like gaming into these content delivery architectures. Some of the technologies like WebRTC are being used by these streaming gaming companies. HTTP3 and QUIC with different types of technology in order to manage some of the bandwidth bottlenecks and reduce round trip times for data. But even that needs to continue to evolve to really get gamers on board, because there's a degree of skepticism as to whether you could run games successfully in the network. And that's something that's going to have to be overcome as an industry, going to have to be overcome in order to really have this thing take off. I think it will. I think it's probably still going to take a couple of years until we get to that stage. But to Pedro's point, gaming's a big, when you look age-wise, kids are playing more and more of their time is spent on games. So you can't ignore that as a component of how these networks are going to be used.
Right. Pedro, you are in the comfortable position, or maybe challenging one, that you're in charge of the product, but also the content product, let's say, but also the broadband. So you have multiple levers to play with, right?
Correct. And I think it's not a challenge. It's challenging in a positive way, not in a negative way, because the amount of connection between the two worlds is increasing dramatically.
Okay. So let's stay with content. We talked about the gaming, but one thing that's a bit close to it is also VR, virtual reality. And Pedro, you at Deutsche Telekom have also recently launched the AR, so the N-Real glasses. So tell us a bit about your AR, VR, or maybe call it XR plans. What's on the horizon, and how fast is it really coming?
So I think that's the first answer that I need to give you about the horizon, the timeline. Honestly, we are still talking about a long-term horizon, so something above 5 years. But we cannot deny the potential of virtual reality and augmented reality, especially when you're talking about media and media interaction. If you look about the potential of transforming your visual space from a screen to all of your visual space, that's what the technology is bringing to you. Specifically, it can give you a much more immersive solution experience, but also a way of doing in a different way today what you do with a companion device. So at times you are in front of your media screen and you have a companion device like an iPad or a smartphone in which you are checking statistics, checking additional information regarding what you are seeing. You can do all of that within your visual space in a AR, VR scenario. So we have identified this a long time ago, and we have done, I would say, interesting work with Unreal, in which we have, let's call it, a prototype of a solution, our media solution that works in this environment, and we are using it to probe solutions for the future. We believe that this is going to be a big thing, but we also believe that we are still years away from it. This will actually put additional requirements on streaming solutions because you have multiple streaming, let's call it, sessions feeding your visual space as a whole, and they will all complement each other regarding your overall experience.
Yeah, so Jim, you mentioned already the low latency and quality challenges that you will have with this kind of applications. Multiple devices like this or the phone. Then, of course, the next logical step is it's not just in your living room, it's on the go, and then we talk about 5G. Now, how does 5G impact the content delivery mechanisms and strategy? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. 5G is sort of, it's a growing market, right? And it has a lot of facets to it. So initially when you talk about 5G, people automatically go to phones, right? You think of mobile phones as being the primary target. And of course, that's a big opportunity for service providers is to deliver high quality video to phones. But it really goes a lot further than phones, right? So the opportunity for 5G can be in-home. So there are opportunities for operators to launch 5G to deliver in-homes, full range in-home services, high-speed data services, video services, and so on through those 5G networks. There are also things like connected cars. Actually, by the time we get to 2023, connected cars connected through 5G connections are going to be the largest population of IoT endpoints are going to be vehicles, right? And increasingly, we don't. I guess when you look to 2023, you don't think cars are going to be driving themselves or anything in 2023. That will take some extra time. But the idea is that as a car you look at how car manufacturers view themselves. In the past, they used to sell vehicles, and that's how they made their money, was off of providing transportation. Increasingly, they're looking at themselves much like Google looks at themselves, which is the vehicle becomes an access point for all of these other services, and it's the data that you gather through these connections that makes this really valuable for them to get the customers, to get their cars into customers' hands. That they have access to this data. You're in your car, although for the pandemic, we probably had quite a few fewer hours on the road. The expectation is that more, people are going to get back in their cars, and we spend more and more time there. So I think the opportunities are great there. And from a content delivery standpoint, there are a variety of things that are different about mobile environments and 5G environments. One is the ability to take the CDN and put it into what we call multi-axis edge compute frameworks, which are placed deeper at the edge of these networks in the radio access network. So being able to support that kind of extension of existing CDN architectures to go deeper and deeper with those frameworks, and also some of the logic that's involved, the routing logic involved in CDN, because the consumers aren't sitting in one place as they are for a fixed network. They may be on a train, as an example, moving from place to place, and some of the routing logic that you would use for that is a little bit different. Some of the routing logic you would use to support multi-access edge compute, where you may have different types of capabilities for your deep edge systems in terms of memory capacity and so on. And so CDNs, there's a layer of technology which we've coined as mobile optimized CDNs that you have to implement to support these kinds of new 5G environments.
Thank you, Jim. Pedro, from your side, a few words on 5G, how you see it?
So for 5G, very interesting. I would perhaps separate the discussion into two scenarios. So mobility scenarios and non-mobility scenarios, like Jim was mentioning. So for mobility scenarios, there is no doubt huge game changers. So the amount of things that you'll be able to do with the bandwidth that now becomes available in mobility scenarios will really shape the applications that we make available, and also the quality of service that we make available to those customers in mobility scenarios. Now, on the fixed side, we also need to look around the cost structure. And there is no denying that for the majority of the use cases, fiber will be way, way less costly than to go with a 5G access network. Still, there are use cases in which fiber will actually be very, very expensive. So if you actually have a house standing alone in 2 kilometers and nothing in between, the actual cost of covering that house maybe is actually higher doing it by fiber when compared with 5G. Within 5G, we also need to separate millimeter wave from non-millimeter wave access. If you look at frequencies around 26 gigahertz, 28 gigahertz, the problem that you have there is actually penetration. So you can only cover a very small geographical area, and you cannot go through walls. So it means that you need to have a lot of let's call it transmission points, and you need to actually connect to those transmission points either through fiber or through other wireless technology. So millimeter wave still has several challenges in terms of the actual real-life applicability in the next few years. I think what's interesting in 5G is what we are already seeing in lower frequency bands, so above 600 megahertz until 3 gigahertz, in which the operators are really rolling out services that really enable game-changing scenarios, even for fixed wireless access. So the ability that we have now to actually deliver 100, 200, 300 megabits per second in terms of access to a customer and actually deliver on quality of service guarantees. So that will be the big game changer for the future.
Okay, great. So I'm looking at the time, so we could probably talk on these topics just for another half an hour, but we have more to cover. So let's move on. And we still have, I see some questions coming in. So by the way, if you have any, dear audience, send us your question and we'll reserve some time at the end. Now, we talked about cloud, we talked about content. Let's talk about personalizing the content. So targeted advertising, advanced advertising is something many are looking into. Pedro, how is that for you at Deutsche Telekom? What are your plans?
Difficult questions. I cannot share all of our plans. I can share our vision regarding that topic. I think targeted advertisement and personalization of advertisement is actually the answer to the question of what's next for a linear advertisement. If you look at the amount of investment in terms of linear advertisement, it's going down. So where is that money going to right now? It's going through to digital touch points. And what digital touch points? Because you have the ability to actually have that personalization or some level of personalization. Maybe we can do it better. We'll get to that. But it's because you have this level of personalization. You can get a more targeted ad experience. Now, if we take the same approach on the, let's call it the media TV space for targeted unicast content, we actually can do that and even more. So depending on what the customer allows us to use in terms of data, we can fully personalize his experience in terms of ads and what are the ads that he gets exposed to and how does he actually interact with those ads. So we see a lot of potential for the future. In this, we see this as a change in the ecosystem in which the operators, because we have this data, because we have with this data, we actually play a much more relevant role, but it will create a triangle in terms of a business in which you have ad providers, you have broadcasters, because they will play a very relevant role because their content is still available. We can personalize the ad experiences on their content, and then operators. So that's the new point of the triangle, and we see this as a very optimistic and positive new growth area for the future.
Okay, great. Thank you, Pedro. Jim, from your experience working with other telcos, what are the key drivers behind the growth of personalized video, let's call it more general?
Yeah. So, so initially, I think as Pedro mentioned, there typically have been some advertising businesses on the traditional linear side, and as these newer IP services get launched, for many operators, some of that wasn't fully implemented on the initial launches of the IP services. And so as you start to add more and more customers, the question becomes like, how do I pick up, how do I replace that ad revenue that is going away from the traditional linear side with an advertising product? The thing that addressable advertising does for you beyond just like replacing the existing business is that it actually creates new revenue opportunities above and beyond that. And the way that it does that is it allows you to target ads at an individual consumer level. And by doing that, if you do a good job of targeting those ads to individuals, what you're doing is eliminating some of the waste that's inherent in some of the legacy ways that ads are delivered. Of course, in legacy models, you may be using ad zones and delivering a singular ad to thousands and thousands and thousands of people. But if you're selling a certain type of product, you're selling baby products, you want to sell them to people that have a baby, right? You don't want to have to spend money as an advertiser reaching people that have no interest in those kinds of products. So if you can be very narrowly targeted, advertisers will pay more for that particular impression. And you can sell that ad space over and over and over again to different people based on the demographics that they're trying to target. And through that, you can generate some additional revenue for the business. It's actually a substantial increase if you can implement it properly and you can fill that ad space. You can generate a lot more money through addressable advertising than you could in those legacy businesses. We actually think it's a driver for operators to migrate some of those users from the legacy platforms to the newer platforms. If they can get that addressable advertising in place, you can actually drive a lot more revenue through your business by implementing some of these addressable ad models. But it is complicated, as Pedro mentioned, that triumvirate of people that are involved. The network service providers, the broadcasters, and the advertisers themselves all sort of need to reach an agreement as to exactly how the business is done and who gets paid when, and so those things are being sorted out. I do expect, we do think this is happening, right? It's happened. Some of the larger operators have begun to do this, and to various degrees of sophistication, right? And we think it's just going to become more and more feature rich and more advanced as time goes on here. So what we expect through the remainder of this year into really the next couple of years, we're going to see a lot of activity in the addressable ad market.
Okay. Pedro, what do you see as the biggest challenge? Is it that navigating the triangle? Is it regulation? Is it legacy systems? Is it technology? What do you think is, if there is one single biggest one?
What I can tell you is that it's not technology. So technology is not a problem. So companies like Velocix have already tackled that. So the technology is there, is mature. We can do this. The biggest challenge is indeed what Jim was mentioning around getting the business to work between the three sides of the triangle. So it's a change in the way that you do business on the ad part. And perhaps, and what we are seeing is that the answer will not be the same in all markets. So we have seen some markets go in one direction, another markets going in another direction, depending very much on the specific dynamics, historical dynamics on how you manage advertisement. But you need to create this synchronization between the three players. And that's the biggest challenge, and that needs to be done in a market-by-market approach.
Okay. Still, Jim, I'm sure you have a few takeaways for technology. You cannot neglect it, and you do it the right way in order to scale and address all the needs of these three guys. So what are the key enablers that will accelerate adoption of advanced advertising from your point of view?
So I agree with Pedro. I think the technologies, the core technologies that are needed to implement this are available. I think that the biggest challenges usually come in the integration of all of those components together, and the key, again, as Pedro mentioned at the beginning, it's all about time to market, right? You want to get a service up and running as quickly as possible. You want to get at that revenue. You want to get experienced in the business of addressable advertising and really get a sense for what works. And you're better off starting now than waiting to do that, because there are a lot of learnings that you'll get from doing that. And so from a tech perspective, what we see as essential is, we've been focusing on trying to build cloud-based SaaS kinds of solutions that enable people to get started fast and small, right? You don't have to build out a giant addressable advertising business. You don't have to say every single channel I'm going to run this on. Pick a channel and say, I'm going to set up a small addressable ad business. I'm going to see how it works. And that's what we've been focused on with operators, is trying to say, let's not make the problem too big, because that could take you years to try to sort out exactly how you're going to do that. Pick a small circumstance, get moving fast. We have a cloud-hosted solution. You can go and get moving on it right away and get some experience, and then go ahead and scale it out. Walk before you run.
Okay, great. So, by the way, dear audience, we had a nice panel discussion just on advertising with Beachfront and Velocix a few weeks back. You surely can find the recording either on Velocix or on my LinkedIn page. And then if you want to deep dive into that topic, that was a discussion an hour just on this, with fantastic productions and things, how to get there, what are the pitfalls, what do you need to think about if you want to go there. We're moving on, and I think let's go back to the full circle. We talked about cloud, the content, personalized content. Now let's look about how efficiently to deliver that content. So let's talk a bit about efficiency. One thing, for example, was multicast ABR that has been or is being discussed these days. Maybe, Pedro, I know your plan, unless it has changed, is to go all IP. OTT is the target, but it may be too early to do it now. What role could multicast ABR play in that journey now and in the future?
I see multicast ABR as a transition technology. I think we really need to make sure that we got our objectives right, and our objectives should be full unicast, so that we move away from what's called telco-specific approaches that carry a weight in terms of development, in terms of integration, that the native OTT players do not have. So in my head, it's very clear that I want to be in a unicast-only environment. That being said, that at times it's not possible, depending on network conditions, but also the current cost approach in different markets. So that's where multicast AVR can play a role as a transition mechanism. So the way that you continue to leverage the efficiency of unicast while replicating a unicast approach to the clients. But you are trading off complexity. In this case, you are basically putting up complexity on the multicast encapsulation on the network, but also on the home gateway, where you need to terminate the multicast AVR and create let's call it the replicated unicast approach towards the client. So our vision is just that transition to, if and when, if needed, we'll use it, but it's not something that we want actively to use.
Right. Jim, what's your view on multicast AVR and your offering maybe as well?
Yeah, sure. So I think Pedro's comments are consistent with what we hear, which is that multicast AVR is appropriate for some circumstances, but not all. Right? It's not a universal solution for everything. Right? So we offer multicast AVR to customers that expect to intend to run a lot of live streaming traffic, but may have some constraints within their network. And the question is always, what's it going to cost to build out the network to support all those additional streams versus what's it going to cost to implement multicast AVR to optimize that live stream traffic and try to fit it all within the existing network. And for many people, it's a debate, right? We got to work out the costs. For some people, it makes a lot of sense to do multicast AVR. In other cases, it doesn't. It does add a little bit of a layer of complexity, because typically what you'll want to do, especially if you're going to introduce an addressable advertising business, is you want this capability to switch back and forth between multicast and unicast. The multicast allows you to get the efficiencies similar to like a broadcast, right? You can reduce the amount of traffic and you don't have to deliver an individual stream to each individual consumer. But the challenge with that is that if you're going to do things like addressable advertising, where you want to target a specific ad to a specific customer, multicast cannot do that. So you need to switch back to unicast midstream in order to support that personalized content. And that's where that complexity comes in, right? You got to be able to go back and forth. Now we do that in our multicast AVR platform, and it works very well, but it is something that is a consideration for folks when they look at it. It's a trade-off, right? And so we typically will go with sit down with customers, go through a consultation process, evaluate it based on the cost and the merits, and then decide ultimately what's right for the specific customer and the regions that they're serving.
Okay, you mentioned live content, and I know that brings it back to sports and my Magenta subscription that I will need to discuss with Pedro later. What about sports and ultra low latency? That's a buzzword that goes together.
Yeah.
What's the story behind it? Why do I need ultra low latency for sports?
Okay,
we talked about gaming, but what about sports?
Sure. Ultra low latency is not really a new topic, so the question may be, why are we talking about it in a topic of a discussion on the future? But the truth is that while it's not a new topic, we've been talking about it for a while. It hasn't really been broadly implemented from a CDN perspective. I think so first of all, let's talk about the reason why ultra low latency remains a discussion in the industry. And first of all, it has to do with multi-screen viewing. Initially, it was multi-screen viewing in that when you had apartment buildings and things like that, you were worried that the guy that lived next door to you was going to use a different TV service, and when the game-winning score happened, you would hear cheers from your neighbors about that before you saw it on your TV, which would be a disruptive kind of experience for a sports fan. It also applies in cases where you're trying to sell services into commercial kinds of environments, businesses like sports bars where they have multiple TVs running side by side, and they want to make sure, all of these TVs are synchronized and you don't have confusion amongst the people there. But increasingly, when we start to look forward, it's about some of these social viewing and shared viewing kinds of applications where you can have people in different locations watching the same program at the same time. You can have other types of social interactivity for their Twitter feeds and other sorts of real-time communications that are happening on games. And the idea here is that with ultra-low latency, you have to be in sync with between screens, and you have to be in sync with what's happening for social media for the fan experience to be a good one, right? Otherwise, it's disruptive because you're getting information at different times, and it's going to ruin the experience. So what we're seeing is, there's been some consensus around ultra-low latency. It seems like in the industry, most people are moving forward with things like ultra-low latency CMAF. The biggest challenge with that implementation and why it hasn't been put in place at a lot of people thus far is that, again, it's an integration challenge. There are multiple pieces to the puzzle that have to fit together, from encoders, origin servers, CDNs, media players, all have to implement these specifications and perform interop testing in order to make sure that all works so you can get really, really low latency. And that's happening now, right? All of those integration kinds of activities are happening. So we do expect that this ultra low latency stuff is all going to get deployed over the next 12 to 24 months, and then there are going to be continual. We talked about gaming and other sorts of things where you're continuing to drive latency down. This is not the end of the discussion on latency. It's actually just the beginning of that discussion. So we think there are going to be a lot more technologies and standards and so on that are going to come into play to try to drive down that latency signature. Okay.
Pedro, you've been nodding. I think that's a yes. You agree, or anything to add?
I fully agree. I think it's a perfect description. I'll just add the historical context that I think it's important. How do we got to this situation? I think we all need to understand that sending video over networks, over IP networks, had challenges in terms of resilience and in terms of that the actual bandwidth would fluctuate over time. So what was the answer to that? It was buffering. By definition, if you buffer, you are introducing delay, and you buffer at different levels in the overall ecosystem. So that's the problem that's the historical perspective. Now with networks that are more performing, that have more bandwidth, we can actually optimize a lot of the things that we have done in the past, and CMAF is that example. It's just basically fragmented MP4 so that you actually buffer much, 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 much less than you would buffer in a normal setup. So we are getting there.
Perfect. We have a few minutes left for questions, so if you, dear audience, have more questions, send them. We have a few already, and the first one is from Pedro to Pedro and Jim, another Pedro Vasconcelos. And his question is, what is your view on 5G edge computing capability and how that could shape content delivery and new services? It's a question for both of you, so whoever wants to take it.
I can jump in there. So what we're seeing in terms of edge computing, edge computing is increasingly. Sometimes I interchange these words. I call it edge cloud, right? Because what we're seeing happening in the edge computing environment is that a lot of the capabilities of the cloud and a lot of the same kinds of underpinnings for cloud technology have introduced themselves into the edge, and so. There's a lot of similarities to that. So when we talk about multi-cloud and having the ability to run applications across different kinds of cloud provider environments, so if you're using Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud or Azure or so on, the key from an application perspective is to be able to run across those different environments seamlessly and to make it so that it's transparent from an operator's perspective to be able to run that. I think the 5G edge computing environments are very similar to that in that there are some nuances to it, but ultimately the idea is to make the applications transparent to those frameworks, and I think that kind of cloud native environments are really what we're seeing at the edge of the networks.
Pedro?
It's exactly that. I can only complement that it's all about the network topology. So edge computing is just that. What's different between a 5G network and, for instance, a fiber network is the actual topology of the network and where you place the last active equipment in the network. So it's something that the lessons that we have learned in the past for other types of networks are applicable to the 5G environment.
Okay, thank you. Next question from, I hope I pronounce it correctly, Subdev Johal. For you, Pedro, what is Deutsche Telekom's view on open caching? You mentioned it before. There's many service providers, major content providers, they're strongly embracing it. What's your view on it?
So we are also part of the initiative, DT as a group, and we are a big supporter. So I think it's an initiative in terms of standardization, basically in terms of interconnection between CDNs, and I hope in the future that we all, as a community, both on the operator side as well as the vendor side, embrace this standard for the future.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I think open caching as a standard is something that I think everybody wants to have happen. I think it makes a lot of sense from a CDN perspective, something that we support, and it really comes down to some of the, like the advertising stuff. It comes down to some of the business arrangements that surround open caching and how you monetize some of the delivery capabilities and the infrastructure investments that service providers are making to support the standards. Right, the tech is actually the easy part. It's the rest of it that becomes the bigger challenge.
It's again having people agree on what to use. Yeah, it's often that case. Yeah. Good. So we're approaching the full hour. We're running out of time. So maybe I do a last question. So we talked about many different things: the cloud, the content itself, personalizing content, and delivering it efficiently. So if you pick one thing of the many things we discussed today, what would you recommend an NSP, a telco, to definitely look at first? And I let you, Jim, go first, and Pedro has the last word.
Okay. Well, I think that it's important to look at the things that are going to make you money as a service provider. so those are the keys. It either has to make money or it has to save a substantial amount of money. I think the addressable advertising opportunities are substantial, and there are things that can be done right now to go ahead and generate additional revenue. If you have a video business, you should be looking into this. 5G, if you're investing in 5G networks, you should be having discussions about how you leverage that investment in those 5G networks to drive customers to use those services. It depends on how you sell them, whether these are upgradable 5G services, but some of the video platforms and entertainment platforms and gaming and so on are going to drive people towards those 5G connections. And then some of the cost-saving stuff around and quality of experience improvements around multi-CDN, I think are critical, right? I think we've covered the right topics on this call for service providers to be thinking about. And as I said, they're future topics, right? So they're the kinds of things that you want to be talking about today and planning for and implementing over the next couple of years. If you're not having a conversation or you're not familiar with those kinds of technologies or concepts, get on the phone and let's talk through it. But I think it's a good area for people to be thinking about if they have a network and they're trying to monetize it and grow their businesses.
Making money is definitely a good idea. Pedro, I think you do agree, right? Lots of money, hopefully.
I do agree. Let me just add, I would split this maybe into two buckets. So core and beyond the core. I think core is very much around making sure that you have the best resiliency on your CDN solution. Your CDN solution needs to work, period. All the times, 100% availability, be there for all the use cases. That's where the first part of the conversation, when we talk about hybrid CDN and multi-CDN, that's an important tool that you'll have with that objective. And that's the core. That's what you need to make sure that is there, always working. Then on the beyond the core, I would agree with Jim. I think we in DT think that the ad personalization piece has huge potential for the future. So it's something that operators should really carefully look at.
Fantastic. Absolutely hit top of the hour. I'm afraid we're running out of time. Pedro and Jim, thank you so much. It was a great discussion. For the ones who joined later, want to look at it again, you're going to be receiving the link to the recording in a few days. By the way, if you want to reach out to either Jim, Pedro, or myself, find us on LinkedIn, or you see some of the emails here. Pedro gets too many, so try on LinkedIn, your luck. It was a pleasure, Pedro and Jim. Fantastic talk. On behalf of all of us, thank you again for watching. Stay safe and see you soon.